In 1959, John Freeman's guest on Face to Face was the outstanding mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell, then within 2 months of his 87th birthday. But far from being a frail old gentleman, he appeared before the camera as spry, mischievous and articulate as the public had ever known him throughout a long career as a campaigner in various causes at odds with the establishment. But it was from the establishment he came, grandson of 2 lords, one of them Lord John Russell, the Liberal Prime Minister. He went to Cambridge in 1890, where he wrote the Principles of Mathematics, and later his great work, Principia Mathematica. His academic work as one of the greatest philosophers of his day continued at Cambridge until the First World War, when his vigorous campaigning as a pacifist got him expelled from Trinity. But he continued as a writer, his History of Western Philosophy, published in 1945, gaining him a more popular acceptance and lasting financial security. Russell, a late Victorian, was an early crusader for free love, in revolt against the humbug and hypocrisy of much of Edwardian life, a freedom exemplified unashamedly in his own private life. After teaching in America, he returned to Britain in triumph after World War II, was given the Order of Merit in 1949, and won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1950. From the 50s onwards, his main concern was the threat of nuclear annihilation. He was the first president of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament at the time of the face-to-face interview. And 2 years later, still battling against authority, he was arrested at an anti-nuclear sit-in in Parliament Square and sentenced to 7 days in jail. He was 89 years old. His face-to-face interview reveals the qualities that sustained his reputation for decades: lucidity of mind, transparent honesty, and an endearing sense of fun.
By the death of the 3rd Earl Russell, or Bertrand Russell as he preferred to call himself, at the age of 90, a link with a very distant past is severed. His grandfather, Lord John Russell, the Victorian Prime Minister, visited Napoleon in Elba. His maternal grandmother was a friend of the young Pretender's widow. In his youth, he did work of importance in mathematical logic, but his eccentric attitude during the First World War Second World War, he took no public part, having escaped to a neutral country just before its outbreak. In private conversation, he was wont to say that homicidal lunatics were well employed in killing each other, but that sensible men would keep out of their way while they were doing it. He appeared in extreme old age, full of enjoyment, no doubt owing in large measure to his invariable health, for politically, during his last years, he was as isolated as Milton after the Restoration. He was the last survivor of a dead epoch. That I wrote in 1937, a year before the Second World War began, as a prophecy of what I thought the Times would say about me when I died. I observed that the date I attributed to my death is 1962, which is coming ominously near and begins to cause me some alarm.
So before you feel too much alarm, let us examine this obituary which was written in jest and see how true it really is. To start with, let's go back to the distant past. What is your very earliest memory, Lord Russell?
Well, I suppose my very earliest memory is tumbling out of a pony carriage when I was 2 years old. And my earliest at all vivid memories are of arriving at the house of my grandparents, Pembroke Lodge in Richmond Park, after the death of my father, who died when I was 3.
How did you come to be in the care of your grandparents? Your mother had also died?
Yes, she died when I was 2 and my father when I was 3. So
do you have any memory of your parents?
Very little. I remember nothing of my mother. I remember my father once giving me a leaflet printed in red letters, and the red letters pleased me.
What was life like at Pembroke Lodge? Did your grandparents, for instance, entertain the great people of the day?
Yes, not very much. My grandfather was already an invalid. He could only get about in a bath chair. He died when I was 6. My grandmother survived for a long time till after I was married, but she lived in semi-retirement. We saw a lot of distinguished people, especially literary people.
Your grandfather had been a politician in his day, as your father.
My grandfather, yes, my grandfather was twice Prime Minister. My father was in Parliament for a very brief period.
Did you meet the great and famous who used to come to visit, or were you shut away in the nursery?
Oh, I used to meet them, yes.
Who especially impressed you at that age?
Well, I think Mr. Gladstone especially impressed me.
Well, what's your memory of him?
Oh, I have a great many memories of Mr. Gladstone. He had an eye that could quell anybody. It was, people who didn't know him can't quite understand his political importance. It depended on his hawk's eye. My most painful recollection of him is when I was 17 and very, very shy, and he came to stay with my people, and I was the only male in the family. And after the ladies had retired after dinner, I was left tete-a-tete with Mr. Gladstone. And he didn't do anything to alleviate my shyness. He made only one remark. He said, "This is very good port they've given me, but why have they given it me in a claret glass?" And I didn't know the answer.
Turning to your occupations as a child, what were the first books that impressed you? For instance, were you interested in history, in fairy stories, in adventure, or what?
Oh, I was always very much interested in history, very much. Fairy stories when I was younger, yes. And I regret to say that I liked Hans Andersen much better than Grimm. I don't now, but I did then, very much better. I read Hans Andersen's fairy tales over and over again when I was young.
Were you always a skeptic from small childhood, or did you believe in the conventions?
Oh, I wasn't a skeptic when I was very young, no. I was very deeply religious and lost my conventional beliefs slowly and painfully.
The fact that my American forebears have for so many generations played their part in the life of the United States, and that here I am, an Englishman, welcomed in your midst, makes this experience one of the most moving and thrilling in my life, which is already long and has not been entirely uneventful. I wish indeed that my mother, whose memory I cherish across the veil of years, could have been here to see. By the way, I cannot help reflecting that if my father had been American and my mother British, instead of the other way around, I might have got here on my own. Sure I am that this day, now, we are the masters of our fate, that the task which has been set us is not above our strength, that its pangs and toils are not beyond our endurance. As long as we have faith in our cause and an unconquerable willpower, salvation will not be denied us. In the words of the psalmist, he shall not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord. Not all the tidings will be evil. On the contrary, mighty strokes of war have already been dealt against the enemy. The glorious defense of their native soil by the Russian armies and people. Wounds have been inflicted upon the Nazi tyranny and system, which have bitten deep and will fester and inflame not only in the Nazi body, but in the Nazi mind. The boastful Mussolini has crumpled already. He is now but a lackey and a serf, the merest utensil of his master's will. Many people have been astonished that Japan should in a single day have plunged into war against the United States and the British Empire. What kind of a people do they think we are? Is it possible they do not realize that we shall never cease to persevere against them until they have been taught a lesson which they and the world will never forget? Here we are, together, facing a group of mighty foes who seek our ruin. Here we are, together, defending all that to free men is dear. Twice in a single generation, the catastrophe of world war has fallen upon us. Twice in our lifetime has the long arm of fate reached out across the oceans to bring the United States into the forefront of the battle. If we had kept together after the last war, if we had taken common measures for our safety, this renewal of the curse need never have fallen upon us. Do we not owe it to ourselves, to our children, to tormented mankind, to make sure that these catastrophes do not engulf us for the third time? It is not given to us to peer into the mysteries of the future. Still I avow my hope and faith, sure and inviolate, that in the days to come, the British and American peoples will, for their own safety and for the good of all, walk together in... Ladies and gentlemen, permit me, please, to claim your attention for a moment. It can only be a moment, for as you know, we are all of us strictly rationed.
Throughout his life, Winston Churchill was haunted by his early experience of piloting propeller planes that could only maintain speed and height by flying into the wind. From it, he took a metaphor for living. The idea of keeping on flying against resistance inspired Churchill's ferocious will to succeed and his desperate fear of slowing down. To lose momentum, he said, is not merely to stop, but to fall.
If you've saved your country, arguably saved the world, what do you do for an encore? That was the question confronting Winston Churchill in the summer of 1945. You'd have thought that after his finest hour as Britain's war leader, Churchill would have rested content. But he didn't. Churchill drove on.